It didn't begin with a headline. It began with a quiet admission, one that slipped out during a private conversation and was never meant to reach the public. But when James Middleton spoke, even subtly, it carried a weight the palace couldn't contain, because what he revealed wasn't just personal, it pointed directly at Prince William, and what it suggested was quietly devastating. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. What made the moment so unsettling was not the volume of what was said, but the depth beneath it. Those who have followed the inner rhythms of the royal family understand that nothing involving the Middletons is ever careless. Every word, every pause, every carefully measured tone carries intention, and this time, the tone felt different. There was no attempt to dramatize, no effort to provoke, but that is precisely what made it impossible to ignore. It was the kind of truth that does not announce itself loudly. It settles in slowly, quietly, until its implications become impossible to escape. Reports began circulating almost immediately, not with accusations, but with questions. Why now? Why speak at all? And more importantly, why did it seem to orbit so closely around William? For years, Catherine Middleton has been viewed as the stabilizing force within the monarchy, the calm center in a world often defined by turbulence. Her family, particularly James, has always existed just outside the rigid structure of royal protocol, close enough to understand it, but distant enough to speak with a different kind of honesty. That unique position gave his words credibility that palace statements often struggle to achieve. Insiders began to suggest that this was not a slip of the tongue, but something far more deliberate. Not an exposure, but a release, as if something long held beneath the surface had finally found its way out. And yet, what truly intensified the speculation was the timing. The monarchy, already navigating a period of quiet uncertainty, did not respond. No clarification, no denial, just silence. And in the world of royalty, silence is never neutral. It is calculated. It is measured. It is, in many ways, a statement in itself. Observers who had spent years interpreting palace behavior noted the shift immediately. This was not the usual strategy of controlled narrative. This felt different, as though acknowledging the conversation, even indirectly, would give it a weight the institution was not prepared to handle. Behind that silence, however, the emotional undercurrents began to surface. It is now whispered in royal circles that Catherine was not caught off guard by what her brother expressed, that she had, in some form, already been navigating the truth he alluded to. And if that is the case, then this was never about a sudden revelation, it was about something that had been quietly unfolding for far longer than anyone realized. A tension not built overnight, but layered over time through pressure, expectation, and the relentless demands placed upon those who carry the future of the crown. Those closest to the situation suggest that what James revealed was not meant to expose William, but to humanize him. And yet, paradoxically, that is what made it so heartbreaking. Because the image of William has always been one of control, of composure, of unwavering strength. To suggest anything beyond that even subtly creates a crack in a narrative that has been carefully maintained for years, and once that crack appears, it becomes impossible to unsee. The most striking detail, however, lies not in what was said, but in what was left unsaid. The pauses, the hesitations, the emotional weight carried between the words. It is in those spaces that the real story seems to exist, a story not of scandal but of strain, not of failure but of burden, a burden that may have grown so heavy, so consuming, that even those closest to the royal circle could no longer remain entirely silent. And as speculation continues to build, one question lingers with unsettling clarity: if this was only a glimpse, only a fragment of a much larger truth, then what remains hidden beneath the surface? Because whatever James Middleton revealed, it was enough to shift the conversation, enough to challenge perception, enough to make people look at William not as a future king alone, but as something far more complex, far more vulnerable, and far more human than anyone had previously been allowed to see. But what exactly did James reveal, and why did it strike at the very core of William's private world? To understand why this revelation cuts so deeply, you have to go back to a bond built far from palace walls. Long before titles and duty reshaped everything, Prince William and Catherine Middleton shared something rare. But behind that image of unity, insiders now suggest there were fractures forming, ones that only those closest like James Middleton, could truly see. What made their connection so compelling in the early years was not just the romance, it was the sense of normalcy that surrounded it. There were no grand declarations, no forced performances for the world to admire. Instead, there was something quieter, something more grounded. Those familiar with their journey often describe it as steady, almost unshakable. And at the center of that steadiness was the Middleton family itself, providing a kind of emotional refuge that royal life rarely allows. It is widely believed that within that environment, William found something he had long been searching for: not just love, but stability. A place where expectations softened, where titles faded, and where he could exist without the constant weight of the future pressing against him. James, in particular, occupied a unique space within that dynamic. Not bound by royal protocol, yet deeply connected to its emotional consequences, he was able to witness both the strength and the strain of that relationship from a perspective few others could access. His closeness to Catherine meant he saw the unspoken moments, the quiet pauses, the subtle shifts, the changes that do not make headlines but slowly reshape everything beneath the surface. And according to those who have observed closely, those shifts did not appear suddenly. They developed over time, almost imperceptibly at first, like cracks forming beneath something that still appeared solid from the outside. As William's role within the monarchy evolved, so too did the pressures surrounding him. The transition from a young royal navigating public attention to a future king carrying the weight of legacy is not a simple one. It is layered, relentless, and often invisible to those outside the institution. Reports suggest that this transformation brought with it an emotional cost, one that could not always be contained behind composed appearances. The demands became heavier, the expectations sharper, and the margin for personal vulnerability almost non-existent. And while Catherine remained a constant presence, those closest to her began to notice the strain it placed not just on him, but on their relationship as a whole. It is now whispered in certain circles that the distance was never dramatic, never explosive, but rather quiet and gradual. The kind that builds over time without clear confrontation. Conversations that became shorter. Moments that felt more controlled than natural. A subtle shift from ease to effort. And for someone like James, who understood Catherine beyond her public role, these changes were impossible to ignore. They did not signal collapse, but they did suggest something far more complex. A relationship adapting under pressure, but perhaps not without cost. What makes this realization so unsettling is the contrast it creates. On one hand, the image of unity remains intact, carefully maintained, consistently presented. And on the other, there are these quiet indications of strain, hinted at only by those who have seen behind the curtain. And it is within that contrast that the emotional weight of James's earlier words begins to take shape. Because if he was speaking from what he had witnessed over time, then his revelation was not sudden, it was the culmination of something that had been building quietly for years. The deeper question, then, is not whether those fractures exist, but how far they have spread. Because within the structure of the monarchy, pressure does not simply test individuals, it reshapes relationships, redefines priorities, and sometimes forces choices that are never meant to be visible. And if William has been navigating that pressure in ways few can fully understand, then the impact on those closest to him becomes not just possible, but inevitable. And as pressure mounted within the royal system, those quiet fractures began turning into something far more difficult to ignore. The public sees composure, stability, control. But behind closed doors, the pressure on Prince William has reportedly reached levels few could withstand. And according to those closest to the situation, that pressure hasn't just affected him, it's changed him. The question is, at what cost? Because what the world celebrates as strength often comes at a price no one is allowed to acknowledge. For William, that price appears to be measured not in public moments, but in private ones, the kind that never reach headlines, yet slowly reshape a person from within. The transition from heir to future king is not a symbolic shift. It is a psychological transformation, one that demands constant discipline, constant restraint, and an almost impossible level of emotional control. Reports suggest that in recent years, that transformation has intensified, pulling him deeper into a role that leaves little room for anything else. And as that role expands, so does the weight attached to it. It is now whispered in certain royal circles that the expectations surrounding him have grown far beyond duty. They have become something heavier, something more consuming. Every decision carries consequence. Every action is measured not just in the present, but against the future of the monarchy itself. And within that environment, even the smallest misstep feels magnified. Those familiar with the internal dynamics suggest that this constant pressure has created a state of quiet tension, one that rarely surfaces outwardly, but never fully disappears either. What makes this shift particularly striking is how invisible it remains to the public eye. The image of control is still there, carefully maintained, consistently projected. But behind that image, there are suggestions of something more complicated. Moments of strain, subtle changes in behavior, a growing sense that the emotional toll is no longer something that can be entirely contained. And for those closest to him, including James Middleton, that shift has not gone unnoticed. Catherine, by all accounts, has remained a steady presence throughout this transformation, a stabilizing force in a system that often leaves little room for emotional grounding. But even stability has its limits, because when one person is carrying an increasing burden, it inevitably begins to affect those around them. Insiders suggest that her role has quietly evolved not just as a partner, but as a support system navigating the complexities of a pressure few truly understand. And while she continues to maintain composure publicly, there are indications that the emotional weight of that responsibility has grown heavier over time. For James Middleton, this evolving dynamic was not something observed from a distance. It was something felt, witnessed in fragments, understood not through official narratives, but through personal connection. His perspective, shaped by closeness rather than protocol, offered a different lens, one that captured the human side of a situation often defined by institutional language. And what he saw, according to those familiar with his viewpoint, was not a collapse, but a gradual shift. A change that did not announce itself loudly, but revealed itself slowly, through patterns that became harder to ignore. The most unsettling aspect of this narrative lies in its subtlety. There is no single moment that defines it, no clear turning point that explains everything. Instead, there is a buildup, a quiet accumulation of pressure, expectation, and emotional strain that, over time, begins to alter the way a person exists within their own life. And when that person happens to be the future king, the implications become even more complex. Because the role demands resilience, but it does not always allow for vulnerability. It requires strength, but offers little space to process the cost of maintaining it. And so, what emerges is a contradiction, a figure who appears unshaken, yet may be carrying more than anyone realizes. A life defined by privilege, yet shaped by pressures that remain largely unseen. And within that contradiction lies the heart of what James's earlier words seem to suggest, that beneath the surface of composure, there may be a story far more human, far more fragile, and far more difficult than the public has ever been allowed to understand. But James didn't just observe the pressure, he saw what it was doing, and eventually, he couldn't stay silent. It wasn't meant to be a revelation. There was no press conference, no dramatic announcement, just a moment, brief, unguarded, where truth slipped through carefully constructed silence. And in that moment, James Middleton said something that changed everything. What made it so powerful was not the setting, but the absence of performance. There were no rehearsed lines, no carefully managed phrasing, no attempt to shield meaning behind formal language. Instead, there was something far more dangerous: authenticity. Those who heard it immediately sensed that this was not a calculated statement, but a glimpse into something deeper. The words themselves may have seemed measured, even restrained, but the emotion beneath them told a different story. It was not what he said outright that drew attention. It was what his words suggested, what they quietly revealed between the lines, that sent a ripple through those paying close attention. According to those familiar with the exchange, the moment unfolded in a setting where defenses were lowered, where the usual barriers of royal communication did not fully apply. And that is precisely what made it so revealing. Because when someone like James, who exists both inside and outside the royal sphere, allows even a fraction of truth to surface, it carries a kind of credibility that official narratives often lack. It is now suggested that his choice of language was careful, yet emotionally weighted, hinted at a reality that had long remained hidden behind composed appearances. A reality not defined by scandal, but by strain. Not by conflict alone, but by something far more complex and deeply personal. The reaction was immediate, though not always visible. Media insiders began dissecting every word, every pause, every subtle shift in tone. Analysts who had spent years interpreting royal messaging quickly realized that this was different. This was not rumor in its usual form. It did not rely on speculation or anonymous claims. It came from someone directly connected, someone whose perspective could not easily be dismissed. And because of that, it forced a different kind of response, not just from the public, but from within the institution itself. Yet the palace did not respond in the way many expected. There was no direct rebuttal, no attempt to reframe the narrative, no visible effort to contain the growing speculation. Instead, there was silence, controlled, deliberate silence. And within the context of royal communication, that silence spoke volumes. It suggested caution, it suggested awareness, and perhaps most tellingly, it suggested that whatever had been said could not be easily contradicted without opening a far more complicated conversation. As the public began to absorb the implications, a subtle shift occurred. This was no longer just about a statement. It became about interpretation. People began connecting details that had once seemed unrelated. Moments from the past were revisited. Behaviors once dismissed as routine were now viewed through a different lens. And gradually, a pattern began to emerge, one that hinted at an underlying tension that had been building quietly over time. What set this moment apart from previous rumors was its tone. There was no aggression, no accusation, no attempt to expose. Instead, there was something far more unsettling, an emotional honesty that felt unfiltered, and that honesty made it harder to ignore. Because unlike speculation, which can be dismissed, this carried the weight of lived experience. It felt less like a claim and more like a reflection, less like a revelation, and more like an acknowledgement of something that had always been there, just out of reach. And within that acknowledgement, the focus inevitably shifted toward Prince William, not in a way that accused, but in a way that questioned. What had he been carrying? What had changed? And why did this moment, this quiet, almost accidental admission feel like the first real glimpse into something the public had never fully understood? Because if James's words were even partially reflective of reality, then they were not simply revealing a situation. They were revealing a state of being. And that is what made the reaction so intense, so immediate, and so enduring. Because once the possibility of a deeper truth enters the conversation, it does not easily fade. It lingers. It evolves. It demands attention. And in this case, it began to reshape the way people saw not just the situation, but the individuals at the center of it. But what made this revelation truly heartbreaking wasn't just what was said, it was what it implied about William himself. For years, Prince William has been seen as the steady one, the future king who never falters. But James Middleton's words painted a different picture, not of weakness, but of someone carrying more than anyone realized, and perhaps slowly breaking under it. What makes this shift in perception so powerful is how quietly it unfolded. There was no dramatic collapse, no visible unraveling, only a subtle redefinition of what strength might actually look like behind the scenes. Because for someone in William's position, strength has always been measured by control, by the ability to remain composed under pressure, to absorb expectation without hesitation, to carry the weight of history without allowing it to show. But James's revelation seemed to challenge that idea, not by contradicting it, but by expanding it, suggesting that what appears as control may, in reality, be endurance. And endurance, when stretched over time, comes at a cost. Those who have followed the inner workings of the royal family now find themselves revisiting moments that once seemed ordinary. Interactions that felt routine now carry a different tone. Decisions that once appeared strategic now seem layered with something more personal. It is as though a new lens has been placed over everything, allowing people to see not just the actions, but the emotional context behind them. And within that context, a different version of William begins to emerge, not just as a future king, but as an individual navigating a reality few could truly understand. At the heart of this interpretation lies a tension that has always existed, but rarely been acknowledged so openly. The conflict between duty and personal life is not new within the monarchy. It is woven into its very structure. But what James's words seem to suggest is that this conflict may be far more intense than previously assumed, that the balance between responsibility and identity is not something that can be maintained indefinitely without consequence, and that for William, that balance may be shifting in ways that are both profound and deeply personal. And alongside him, Catherine Middleton remains a constant presence, but even constancy can carry its own weight. Insiders suggest that her role has evolved in ways that are not immediately visible, that beyond the public image of composure and support, there exists a quieter struggle, one defined not by conflict, but by adaptation, by the need to remain steady while everything around her becomes more complex. And within that dynamic, her silence speaks as loudly as any statement. Because sometimes, the absence of visible strain is not a sign of ease, but of resilience. What is perhaps most striking is how this new understanding reframes William's behavior. Actions once interpreted as calculated now feel protective. Moments of distance now seem reflective, rather than detached. Even his composure, once seen as unshakable, now carries an undertone of effort, as though maintaining that image requires more than the public has ever been allowed to see. And this shift does not diminish him. If anything, it makes him more human, more relatable, but also more vulnerable. Because beneath the titles, beneath the expectations, beneath the carefully constructed image of future leadership, there is still a person, someone navigating pressure that does not pause, expectations that do not ease, and a role that does not allow for retreat. And if James's words have revealed anything, it is that this reality is not without impact, that even those who appear strongest are not immune to the weight they carry. And as this new understanding began to take shape, it forced the palace into a position it rarely finds acknowledgement without confirmation. In the world of the monarchy, silence is never accidental. It is calculated, controlled, and often more revealing than any statement. So when the palace chose not to respond directly to James Middleton's remarks, it sent a message of its own. Because within this institution, words are rarely the primary tool of communication. Absence is. The decision not to deny, not to clarify, not to engage it carries a precision that few outside the system fully understand. Those who have spent years observing royal patterns know that when the palace truly intends to shut something down, it does so swiftly, firmly, and without hesitation. Yet this time, that response never came. And that absence, more than any statement could have, began to shape the narrative in ways that felt both deliberate and deeply strategic. It is now suggested by those familiar with palace operations that this silence was not a sign of indifference, but of caution, because responding directly would mean acknowledging the weight behind what had been said. It would mean entering a conversation that could not be easily contained once it began. And in a system built on control, that kind of unpredictability carries its own risks. So instead, the strategy shifted toward restraint, toward allowing the moment to exist without amplification, while quietly managing its impact behind the scenes. But silence, while controlled, is never empty. It invites interpretation. It creates space for speculation. And in this case, that space was quickly filled. Media insiders began analyzing not just what had been said, but what had not been addressed. Every previous instance of palace communication was revisited, compared, contrasted. Patterns were examined. Timelines were questioned. And gradually a sense emerged that this situation did not fit the usual framework, that it was being handled differently, not because it was insignificant, but because it was too sensitive to confront directly. Public reaction followed a similar path. Without a clear narrative to anchor to, attention turned inward. People began connecting fragments, revisiting past moments, searching for continuity in what once appeared disconnected. And as those pieces came together, a broader picture began to form, one that suggested a deeper, more complex reality than anyone had initially assumed. The lack of denial did not confirm anything outright, but it removed a layer of certainty, and in its place it left possibility. What makes this strategy particularly delicate is the balance it requires. Saying too much risks, exposing more than intended. Saying too little risks, allowing speculation to grow beyond control. And in this instance, the palace appears to be navigating that balance with extreme precision, holding the line without reinforcing it, allowing the conversation to exist, but not fully engaging with it. It is a form of management that relies not on direction, but on containment. And while it can be effective, it is not without consequence. Because within that silence, those closest to the situation are left to carry the weight of what remains unspoken. The public may interpret, the media may analyze, but inside the family, the reality is far more immediate. There is no distance, no detachment, only the quiet awareness that something has shifted and that it cannot simply be undone by ignoring it. And perhaps that is the most revealing aspect of all. That despite the control, despite the strategy, despite the careful handling of every detail, there are moments when silence is not enough to contain what is happening beneath the surface. Moments when the absence of words begins to speak louder than any statement ever could. But while the palace remained quiet, the emotional ripple effect within the family was impossible to contain. At the center of it all is Catherine Middleton. Not just as a future queen, but as a wife, a sister, and someone now caught between two worlds, one bound by loyalty, the other by truth. And according to those closest to her, this may be the hardest position she's ever faced, because Catherine's story has never been defined by conflict. It has been defined by balance, the ability to move seamlessly between two identities, one rooted in family, the other in duty. And for years, she has managed that balance with remarkable precision. But now, that equilibrium appears to be under strain, not from external forces alone, but from something far more personal. A tension that does not demand attention publicly, yet refuses to remain contained privately. Her relationship with Prince William has always been presented as a foundation steady, reliable, unshaken, and in many ways, it still is. But what makes this moment different is the presence of another bond, equally strong, equally significant. Her connection with James Middleton is not shaped by protocol or expectation. It is rooted in familiarity, in shared history, in a level of understanding that exists beyond titles and roles. And when those two worlds begin to collide, the impact is not theoretical. It is deeply emotional. Insiders now suggest that this is where the real weight of the situation lies. Not in what was said publicly, but in what it means privately. Because for Catherine, this is not a distant narrative unfolding around her. It is something she is living through, moment by moment, decision by decision. The emotional toll of navigating divided loyalties is not something that can be easily measured. It does not appear in statements or formal responses. It exists in quieter forms: internal conflicts, unspoken considerations, the constant effort to hold everything together without allowing anything to fall apart. What makes her position particularly complex is the expectation that she remains composed throughout it all. The monarchy does not allow for visible uncertainty. It demands consistency, strength, control, and Catherine has embodied those qualities with unwavering dedication. But behind that composure, there are suggestions of a different reality, one that is not defined by weakness, but by endurance, by the need to carry emotional weight while ensuring that it never disrupts the image she is expected to maintain. It is now whispered that her role within this situation has quietly expanded, that she is not just supporting William but also processing the implications of her brother's words, that she is not just maintaining stability but actively preserving it, and that process, according to those familiar with the dynamics, is far from effortless. It requires constant awareness, constant restraint, and perhaps most difficult of all, the ability to remain neutral in a situation that feels anything but neutral. The contrast between her public presence and private reality has never been more pronounced. To the world, she remains poised, focused, unwavering. But beneath that surface, there are indications of a deeper struggle, one defined not by visible conflict, but by internal tension. And it is that tension that makes this moment so uniquely personal for her. Because unlike previous challenges, this one does not come from outside the family. It comes from within it. And that is what makes it so quietly devastating. Because there is no clear resolution, no straightforward path forward, only a series of choices, each carrying its own consequences. And within those choices, Catherine must navigate not just her role as a future queen, but her identity as a sister, as a partner, as someone trying to reconcile two truths that do not easily align. And as the situation continues to unfold, one question remains: what does this mean for the future? This isn't just a family story anymore. It's a glimpse into the future of the monarchy itself. Because if what James Middleton revealed is even partially true, it raises a question few have dared to ask. Can Prince William carry the crown without losing himself? Because the weight of this moment stretches far beyond a single conversation or a fleeting revelation. It reaches into the very foundation of what the monarchy depends on: stability, continuity, the belief that those who inherit the crown are not only prepared for it, but unshaken by the demands it brings. And for years, William has embodied that belief. He has been the figure people point to when they speak of the monarchy's future with confidence. But now, that certainty feels less absolute, not because it has been disproven, but because it has been complicated. Public perception, once firmly anchored in the idea of unwavering strength, is beginning to shift, not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, quietly. The narrative is no longer as simple as it once was. There is now a layer of depth that did not exist before, a recognition that beneath the role lies a person navigating pressures that are not easily understood from the outside. And while that recognition does not weaken the image of William, it does reshape it. It introduces vulnerability into a space that has long resisted it, and that vulnerability, while humanizing, also raises questions about what lies ahead. The monarchy itself has always relied on the illusion of certainty, the idea that no matter what happens behind the scenes, the institution remains steady. But moments like this challenge that illusion. They do not break it, but they test it. They force a reconsideration of how strength is defined, and whether resilience alone is enough to sustain a role that demands so much, so consistently, over time. Because resilience, while powerful, is not infinite, and when it is stretched too far, it begins to reveal the limits of even the strongest individuals. Within this evolving narrative, Catherine Middleton's role becomes even more significant, not just as a partner, but as a figure who will help shape the future of the crown alongside William. Her ability to maintain balance, to navigate complexity without losing composure, becomes more than a personal strength. It becomes a cornerstone of the monarchy's stability moving forward. And yet, as this situation has shown, even that balance is not without its challenges, because the more pressure placed on one part of the system, the more the entire structure must adapt to support it. At the heart of it all lies a tension that cannot be easily resolved: the fine line between strength and sacrifice, between fulfilling duty and preserving identity. And for William, that line may be becoming increasingly difficult to navigate. Because every step closer to the crown brings with it not just greater responsibility, but greater personal cost. A cost that is rarely acknowledged, but always present. And if James's words have done anything, they have brought that cost into sharper focus. What makes this moment so powerful is not that it provides answers, but that it raises questions. Questions about leadership, about resilience, about the human side of an institution, often defined by tradition. And those questions do not fade easily. They linger, they evolve, they shape the way the future is understood long before it arrives. Because in the end, this was never just about one revelation, it was about the quiet cost of becoming king. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.